Mythopoeia.
At long last, we are getting to the fun part. Lest you forget, this collective was founded by avant-garde artists known for heavy experimentation, and as so we strive to become much more than some stale social services office which offers nothing more to look forward to than a countertop candy dish. Compra Chicos has opted for somewhat of a novel approach to activism, incorporating mythical and role-playing elements, and in a way that anticipates profound psychological and sociological effects. We wish to build upon the hereinbefore described philosophical premise, with a sort of interactive mythological plot, which invites world-building, while real-world events, locations, and other concepts are mythologized and incorporated into our collective narrative to become as these elaborate fortresses and weapons and divisions and events, so as to allow us a better grip, so to speak, on their abstractness and impersonality. The Compra Chicos thus seeks to transcend the form of some abstract entity built around a humanitarian philosophy, to become something more cinematic and imaginative. An army of mutant military protagonists who mix military uniforms with witch hats and ride lions and shoot laser beams and operate these vehicles that are a mix between UFOs and military tanks while saving children from monsters and other hazards. I hesitate to call any of this canonical, especially since I am heavily sleep-deprived, and many of the choices made in this period likely reflect my condition, and my childlike amusement, more than any sort of strategic sensibility. Yet while you may wish for me to expound further upon the collective mythos, I am unable to satisfy such a request, being that these myths are yet to be established, and will involve a collective ongoing participation over many years. That all tends to come across as quite eccentric, and there has been some debate over the place of eccentricity and even humor within a collective bearing such serious and pragmatic aims, and whether it is achievable without undermining the tone of that which we are building. While we leave it up to each individual and division to determine their own approach and public image, I am conscious of the fact that a stern precedent would create for an inhospitable environment and a non-viable vision withal, for which reason I have attempted to introduce more quirky and surrealistic elements into the overall mix, which also help to keep us from seeming as some extremist organization, which we are clearly not. I think that my message is ultimately this: do not neglect your mental health. And that in itself boils down to this: do not neglect your enjoyment, just as I encourage all participants to take a break if ever they should feel themselves becoming overwhelmed. Yea, as seriously as I treat this collective and the ideals upon which it bases itself, I want this to be a pleasant experience for all involved. Before continuing on, I would like to establish an understanding of the nature of myth and the function that it serves. Our world, as should be clear to all, is made up of both physical and non-physical elements. Whereas the field of science represents our attempts to understand the material physical world, the physical is only half of the equation. Though we do not have any reliable means to study the purely abstract, as it is incomprehensible to us unless in the case that it is tethered to analogic concepts in the physical domain. Such is the nature of myth, which represents not just storybook fables but all our attempts to materialize or give body to abstract and unknown concepts by tying them to concepts within our control, concepts capable of being measured. Myth is essential to understanding our lives on this sphere, yet we must be cautious in how we go about it, so as to not become so attached to the vectors that we forget the purpose that they serve, as this is where myth mutates into religion and other perverse forms which represent our inability or unwillingness to accept the abstract on its own terms. The greatest challenge that we face in our endeavor is convincing the inactive population of the power that lies dormant therein, the power to effect widespread social change. Once we have managed to awaken the sleepers, so to speak, and once they have gone on to recognize ignorance as the real enemy against which we contend, the war is as good as won. It is in this way that we expect the mythopoeic approach to prevail as a strategy, since it liable to appeal to the very demographic toward which we are so focused. An audience of introverts and outsiders who so often feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of our imploding society. A lack of confidence breeds laziness, and thus we must look to restore that confidence, that sense of relevance, which is done by looking to the areas in which these same individuals feel themselves powerful and capable, and seek to remodel our enterprise thereupon. It's a very complex maneuver, having the ability to affect our realities on the paradigmatic level. Efforts of this variety might normally be enacted for insidious or otherwise selfish purposes, like with the intent to remove others from reality, and bring them into some escapist fantasy which benefits the creators financially or socially. Yet Comprachicos employs these methods not as a means to restrict and enslave, but to liberate. Yea, for we do not seek to craft a world of fantasy whereto all men and women may escape the troubles of the day, but a world wherein the threats that we are facing as a society are ever more palpable, ever more urgent, ever more relevant to our lives, along with appearing smaller and altogether more quashable by way of representation. In an age in which all are taking to escapist avenues as the world unravels around them, it will be easier to dissolve the lines between escapism and proactivity than to change the innate tendencies of the population. And so we shall. And so we shall. All of this is expected to make for a more fulfilling experience for all parties involved, if not a pleasure outright. And perhaps it is the child in me, but I absolutely love this type of thing. Though let not the presence of creativity and pleasurability undermine the purpose that they serve, for nothing suggested herein is without its function, and all must tie into the mythology that will empower us and net us our victory as a society. While we certainly wish to see this myth develop into something attractive and appealing, the dimension of symbolic significance is overall more important than those of uniqueness, coolness, and the like. As in, we want it to function as a thoughtful and intricate analog of our human condition and current world events to such a degree that it aptly comes down like an overlay upon our lives and in the absence of superfluity. The same applies to the process of establishing one's personal myth or narrative, which begins not with an ideal, but with the reality of one's person and one's experiences, which are then transposed. Unlike the actual military, wherein participating members are called to erode their identities in the name of service unto the whole, Comprachicos favors the way of distinction and individuality. Yea, we don't believe such self-debasement to be a necessity of service. In fact, it is strongly believed that we are best equipped to serve the population only once having gained a firm handle on our selfness, prior to which we are ill-equipped to empathize and can only grasp the needs of others via a set of popular assumptions which may or may not be effective within a given situation. This talk of individuality isn't to say that you need to color your hair and don some gaudy outfit. All of it should ideally connect to a greater underlying aspect of your psyche or circumstances. Give yourself a new name or pseudonym and work on developing a personal symbol set which allows you to feel empowered and in control of yourself, your fate. More than being a fun way to pass the time, I see this as playing into a powerful psychological paradigm by working to concretize the abstract narrative and symbols of our lives, whereby we shall learn to recognize the gravity of our every act and encounter. For that to be the case, we must approach the matter more as archaeologists, unearthing the primitive and symbolic parts of ourselves, rather than like an artist which seeks to create anew based on preference. Hardly have I scratched the surface of the potential contained in these ingredients, and I do not doubt that this mythopoeic approach could be groundbreaking on various psychosocial levels. Accordingly, I urge all participants to act with caution and to keep their motives clearly aligned with the hereinbefore delineated outcome, for we do not seek escapism in our dealings. We do not seek the relief of fantasy in a time while others suffer and die. Rather, we wish to dissolve the separatrix which divides inaction from action, the doable from the undoable, the dreamer from the revolutionary, awakening the population thus to its own capabilities. For is myth not the means whereby the abstract is made tangible and workable unto a materialistic population? As so, the incorporation of myth can, ironically, be a way of making reality ever more real and relevant to all, and that is what I want for the system. As so, The incorporation of myth can, ironically, be a way of making reality ever more real and relevant to all, and that is what I want for the system. Yea, it goes beyond some ego-inflating roleplay, and I truly desire for such a system to be developed into a legitimate modern collective mythology, where all members and divisions contribute and to which all of society is witness. We aren't simply creating a collective organization here. We are creating psychosocial archetypes and associations which, if executed properly, will live on in the public consciousness as an accepted part of our species and its timeline forevermore. Thus we must ensure that we do not deviate from the stated purpose by using these means for selfish, exploitative, and pathological ends, and in the case of error, I must trust that there will be those of you who will work to guide it back. Over time, I expect that we'll arrive at a more stable means of moderating our mythology and its development so as to keep it organized and well observed, like a language, and not but some cum rag for fantasists and trolls.